am Dr. Pavitra Bharadwaj. I teach computer science in the Department of Computer Science, Jesus and Mary College, University of Delhi. So friends, you have been following the lectures which are being showcased for you in this channel, and we have been doing in the last few lectures we have been doing a series on Python programming. So if you are following the series, you would know that the last few lectures, 6, 7, 8 lectures, they were talking about the basics of Python and the basics of program writing in Python, and we had also discussed briefly how exceptions and errors are handled using the Python. Now we come to the real power of Python, which is making Python the most important and one of the most talked about tools in today's age of data sciences, and that is how Python can be used for analysis and visualization of data. So we know that we are living in an age of data, we are surrounded by data from all sides, there is a lot of data which is being collected. We know about big data, we know how much data is being generated on the web, in the e-commerce portal. There are so many millions of financial transactions, credit card, banking transactions, online trading, purchasing, and above all the social networking. So we understand that we are surrounded by data, and that data that we are surrounded by is actually having a very different characteristic from the usual data, which the data has been perceived over the years, because now the data that we are looking at is actually big data. Now why are we calling this data as big data? Because it has three main characteristics that we are looking at, which we commonly call as the 3 V's. Now what are the 3 V's? The 3 V's are velocity, variety, and veracity. Now what is this? So basically the data which is being generated on the internet, in the social networking sites, it is generated, it is not in one particular format. So basically the data which is being generated is multivariate type of data. There is a lot of variety in that data. So you come across text data, you come across blogs, you come across vlogs, you come across animations, GIFs, images, videos, short videos, reels, so and SMSs. So it's a whole variety of data that is being generated at all the time, and this data needs to be processed, it needs to be stored, and it needs to be analyzed for purposes. Second characteristic of this data is the volume. So volume means that the amount of data which is being generated is like beyond one's imagination, because every moment millions of users are using the web, the social networking websites, and therefore they are generating so much of data that traditional approaches cannot be used for that data. And the third thing is the velocity, that is the speed at which the data is being generated, is also a very important characteristic of the modern day data analysis systems. So therefore we understand that we are not just surrounded by data, but the data that we are surrounded by is huge in volume, it needs to be processed at an enormous speed, and it is a wide variety of data. So therefore the data sciences or this particular domain of knowledge has undergone a lot of change in the past few years, and we look at data analysis for the purpose of using this data most efficiently, so that it can be helpful, it can become very useful for business decision making, or it can be very helpful for scientific decision making, or it can be very helpful for other user related applications. So this big data can be used, this data is stored in warehouses, and then we use the data mining techniques to use it. But actually Python plays a very important role in this step of data analysis and visualization, because it provides us with number of libraries, with number of tools which can be used for for analysis of the data, and at different levels of this data analysis Python plays a very important role. So therefore one major module of Python is actually dedicated to the analysis and visualization of Python, and there are separate libraries which are dedicated for the purpose and function of data analysis. So, basically before we actually look at how Python can work for data analysis, it is important to understand what the process of data analysis is or what one means by data analysis, and then through examples we will see how Python fits into it and what are the other tools also. It is not that only Python can be used for data analysis, there are other tools also which can be used for this purpose. So, we will also look at some of the examples of other tools which can be used, and also simultaneously we will keep looking at the Python examples in each of these steps. So, basically when you want to work on data analysis, you need to understand that there are 5 main pillars of data analysis which are called on which the entire realm of data analysis is dependent. So, there are these are, you can say that these are steps in the process of data analysis. So, the first step is data collection. After you collect the data, then comes data cleaning. After the data has been cleaned, then you go for exploratory data analysis, then we go for statistical analysis, and finally we do the data visualization or presentation of the data which has been analyzed for the user in the form of graphs, charts or different kinds of visual tools, visual objects we can say. So, we will be looking at each of these steps in detail, and we will be seeing what happens in each of these steps and what are the potential what are the potential cautions which one has to take while taking this. So, first step here is the data collection. So, it is a very important step in data analysis because it involves the gathering of data, gathering of accurate and relevant information that will actually be analyzed, and from that you will be getting the insight. So, this is the this is the first step, it lays the groundwork for all the subsequent analysis and decision making processes. So, data collection is very vital because if a mistake creeps in, or if an error creeps in the stage of data collection, then that error is going to be exponentially multiplied, or it will increase its scope exponentially as you go on further in your analysis procedure. So, therefore, this is very important and significant step. So, there can be different methods which are used for different types of data collection. So, data primarily we look at data in two ways. So, there are two types of data we can say. So, you have primary data and you have secondary data. So, while you are collecting your data, you can have different methods depending upon what kind of data you want to collect. So, the three main methods which are discussed or which are talked about most is that you have surveys and questionnaires, you have database queries, and you have web scraping. So, these are the 3 different types of forms, 3 different types of methods which can be used for collecting the data. Like for example, data is collected in an online survey, right. So, now if we look at the data, we understand that the 2 types of data are the primary and the secondary data. So, primary data is actually that data which is collected directly from the source for a specific research purpose or for a specific purpose here would be say. So, if you are collecting data through a survey or a questionnaire, you are using some kind of online form, you are using some kind of structured tool to gather the data, then that data is known as your primary data. Like interviews is one of the very important tools or methods for collecting primary data because you are directly conversing to obtain the detailed insights. Then sometimes in particularly in case of science or scientific data collection, experiments are the primary basis of collecting the data. So, we have some control tests to collect the data under some specific set of conditions. So, in scientific realm, experiments are the main pillar of providing us with the primary data. And then of course, we have observation. Observations means that you are simply recording the behavior or events as they are occurring in a very systematic manner. So, the data collector is just observing how events are occurring, how the behavior of respondents is changing, and they will only note. So, they will not intervene, but it is like a more kind of a passive method. Then we have the secondary data. So, secondary data, and it means that the data was collected for another purpose before the event of our event took place, and now it is being used for the current analysis. So, this data is not it is not directly collected for this particular exercise which is under focus, but it was collected for some other purpose and now it can be used. So, in secondary data, basically the main sources of secondary data are the public databases like the government records, academic research databases or the industry reports. Then there are some other existing reports in the company records are there are some financial reports, market research studies are there, and also there are multiple online sources like you can collect data from website or relevant social media pages or different kinds of forums, etc. So, there can be various sources from which secondary data can be collected for this. Now, as we already said that we are looking at different methods of collecting data. So, each method has its challenges and its advantages, right. Like for example, if you look at survey and questionnaire, right. So, survey and questionnaire is very quick method, because if you float a survey, if it is an online survey, so you can gather data from a very large number of respondents in a very in a short span of time. But it also faces a challenge that the design of the survey has to be very clear and carefully done, because it can have the problem of bias if it is not clearly defined. If your questions in the survey form are not clearly stated, then that can lead to bias or that can lead to misleading results from your respondents. So, there are multiple tools which are used these days for conducting surveys, particularly online surveys. So, we have Google Forms, we have Survey Monkey, and otherwise we can also have the simple form also. Then another very popular method of primary data collection is the interview. So, interview provides in-depth and detailed data, but it is a very time consuming method, right, because you have to one-to-one interaction has to occur, and also this also sometimes it may involve the interviewer bias, because if the interviewer is not looking at the situation from a neutral perspective, then his or her bias can creep in while the answers of the interviewee are being registered. So, interviews, of course, they can be structured, they can be semi-structured, they can be unstructured interviews where the questions are not decided in advance and it is more like a conversational way of collecting the data. Then another very important technique is the observation. So, where actual behavior in natural settings is observed to collect the data. Now, again this is also a very subjective and influenced by the observer's perspective. This is one of the main challenges, that the perspective of the observer may have its role in determining the results or in in noting the result. So, participant observation is also there and non-participant observation is also there. That is, participant observation means that the observer is also a part of the team or of the event or of the subjects which are being observed. Non-participant means that the observer is not a part of the group, but only standing there and observing. The observer is not a part of the event which is occurring, right. Then we have experiments. So, experiments, of course, we know that they will establish a causal relationship through controlled conditions, right. So, we design an experiment, right. When you are designing an experiment, it is supposed to be very objectively done. So, you have a set of causes and you have a set of effects which will be due to those causes, right. So, sometimes there are situations where experiments may not be feasible or they may not be ethical. So, in that case we need to devise some kind of innovative approach for collecting the data. So, experiments could be controlled experiments or they could be field experiments. So, not just in science, in other domains of knowledge, even in social science, social experiments can also be studied, they can also be carried out for collecting of data. Then another very important and lately popular way of collecting data is known as web scraping. Now, web scraping basically means that automated collection of data from the websites is going to take place. So, there are tools like there is a tool called Beautiful Soup, or there is another very popular tool called Scrappy. So, these tools, they actually run an automated a program which is going to collect the data from the relevant websites, but it faces a challenge because it requires programming skills and adherence to legal and ethical guidelines, because you cannot just take out data from which is available on public platforms or websites. Sometimes we understand that a lot of users' private or personal data is scraped from the website, for particularly in the case of AI or learning systems, this kind of thing work where users data is scraped from the website. So, there are concerns of privacy and user protection, user data protection, which keep coming in this particular method of data collection, that is your web scraping method. So, when we are actually going for data collection, so data collection is a very systematic method, systematic step, it is a systematic way in which this is to be done. So, before data collection starts, actually the planning for data collection has to be undertaken. So, what is in the planning step? Basically, we need to clarify what are the objectives of the research. We need to define the objectives of the purpose why data is being collected. So, research questions have to be clarified, right, that is what is it that the user or the experimenter wants to find out, and then you have to identify the key variables and also reason why the variables are essential for your analysis. So, you need to identify the question, you need to identify the variables, and you need to identify the essentiality of the variables for your particular purpose, right. So, when you are going in for designing, or when you are wanting to collect the data, you want to design a questionnaire or an interview, then you have to align the whole survey, or you have to align the interview with your research objectives. So, if you are interviewing, you need to prepare a list of questions or topics that you are going to put up in the interview. So, this data collection tools also need to be designed, they need to be well defined before you actually go for the data collection. Then you need to select the sample, right. It is very important that when a study is being conducted, you need to know that what is going to be your sampling method, that is how much, what part of the universe you are going to take in your study. So, there can be different sampling methods which can be used. So, for example, you can have a random sampling. Random sampling means that each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. So, you can pick up the respondents randomly. Then another option could be stratified sampling, where you divide the population into strata or into groups or into layers, and then you take samples from each of the stratum. Like for example, if you are conducting a study on educational or learning outcomes in various classes of schools in Delhi. So, in that case what you will do is you will create layers, and you will maybe you will group the students, say class 1 to class 3, class 4 and 5, then 6 to 8. So, what are you doing? You are actually dividing your population into strata, into layers, and from that you are taking samples so that for your study to collect the data. Then we also have a technique called cluster sampling. So, in this, entire clusters are randomly selected and data is collected from within these clusters. So, this cluster sampling is very commonly used in sociological and other kind of humanities type of research. So, different types of sampling can be used, and the method for sampling will depend, again it will be dependent upon your research question and your research objectives, what your research objectives are. Then after you have decided, and after you have used the correct sampling method, after you have picked up the tools for your data collection, before you actually start collecting your data, you first go for a pilot testing. So, the purpose of the pilot testing is that you test your data collection tools on a small sample to identify the issues, and then you refine the tools based on the feedback and the results. For example, if you have designed a survey form, if you have an online survey form and your actual study requires you to have maybe a sample size of 1000 people, but you will not initially, you cannot directly float it. The best thing would be that you first float it on a small number of people, maybe 15 to 20 or maybe 50 to 100 respondents. You see the kind of data which you are getting. If it is aligning with your research objectives, then it is okay, but most of the times you will feel that the questions need to be tweaked, or the language of certain question needs to be changed, so that the users can give better responses. So, after your pilot testing phase is over, then you make changes to your tool, you refine your tool, whether it is a scrapping tool or whether it is your survey or an interview, and then you again go back and do the data collection. You go back and do the data, the first step you go back and then you float the data collection tool again and you go for the data collection. So, there are multiple data collection tools, there are online tools which are available, and there are other tools like we know that Google Form, SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics is also there, which is also a very sophisticated survey and data collection platform. So, these tools can be easily used. Then we also have some data collection software which can be used, like one very popular software for building and managing online surveys and databases is the RedCap. Then you can also use the Survey Gizmo, which is now called the Alchemist tool, for collecting and analyzing the survey data, right. And then of course, once the data is collected, you need to manage the data, you need to store that data, organize that data. So, for that of course, you have simple Excel which can be used, or Google Sheets can be used, which provide a collaborative data management and analysis platform. So, once when you are into collecting your data, then it is also very important to look at certain ethical considerations regarding the data collection. So, first and foremost, that the data collector should have the consent of the participants. So, the participant should be informed before the data is being collected from them. The team should always have the consent of the people who are participating in the survey. Then privacy is one very important concern, because it is the duty of the team which is collecting the data to protect personal information and adhere to data protection regulations. Then accuracy is also very important. One must always strive for accuracy in data collection, so that misleading results are not created, misleading results are not given as an outcome of your data collection phase. So, friends, this was all about data collection, planning and the various tools which can be used for data collection. We will continue with the other steps in analysis of data in the following lecture. Please keep watching CEC. Thank you.